Hey, good morning, y'all. Welcome to Sunday School via YouTube. I hope that y'all enjoy the fish tank, but also the scripture that we're going to dive into today. So join along, it's going to be good.
This week we're looking at John chapter 13, verses 1 through 20, and we're going to be talking about what fits into the church calendar right now. As you're watching this, it's Easter, or afterwards, but this passage is on Thursday night, so the Thursday before Easter. Sometimes we call that Maundy Thursday, or Commandment Thursday, because there's this command that Jesus gives in this passage, and we're going to look at that and see what that is and what it means. But just to real quick kind of think about the context of the passage before we stop and reflect on it. Jesus has come into Jerusalem. He's the king who's returned, and he's returned, though, in peace, on a donkey, like in a carriage, as opposed to like in a tank. And so he's returned, and now he's with his disciples, and they're hanging out in the upper room, which is a borrowed house, basically, where they're having a dinner. And the way they did dinner back then was a little different than we do today. If you've ever played a board game with a bunch of people, and you're all trying to get really close to the board game, and maybe you've got it in the center of your living room, and everyone's kind of, circled up on the board game, and looking straight into the center, and your feet are kind of going out because you're kind of like up, leaning into the board game. They ate dinner normally laying down on like one side with one arm down, laying on the ground, and they would do that so that more people could get towards the food in the center. And so when they did that, they would also then have servants come and wash their feet, because they're living in a time where they didn't have closed-toed shoes, and they didn't have paved roads, and they didn't have cars. So they walk everywhere in chacos, basically.
And their feet are disgusting.
They're really gross. And so with their really gross feet, they would have servants come and wash them. And there was actually a debate at the time going on. People had Jewish servants, which they liked, and then Gentile servants, who weren't Jews, who they didn't quite like as much. And they weren't quite as much a part of the family. And there was a debate. If you had both a Jewish servant and a Gentile servant, was it even right for you to make the Jewish servant wash your feet? Because it was so low, it was so menial, it was so gross, that a lot of people were like, no, you shouldn't do that to your servant even. Like, only the lowest of the low servant should wash someone's feet. And so in the story, we're going to see Jesus in this upper room the night before Passover, the night before what we're going to celebrate is Easter, basically, on Thursday night, get up and become the lowest of the low servant. Whole lot there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro. So what we're going to do is put up a picture on the screen. So go ahead and find a physical Bible. I know you probably have your phone or your laptop right here, but we want you to find a real Bible if you can. And go ahead and turn to John 13, 1 through 20. Read the passage, read it through 2-3 times, and then try to go through these questions. And if you can't think of an answer, that's okay, don't worry. And then push play and come listen to our discussion about it. Hey, welcome back. Assuming y'all have read the passage, let's dive in.
Alright, so first off, which part stood out to you as like the most unique or strange, or just like, what?
Yeah, well, definitely the first part of Jesus, the King, our Savior, washing their feet. Like you were saying, they essentially were chacos and have dirty, gross, dusty feet. That's a really lowly thing for Jesus to do. So that's just really surprising. And then another thing that stood out, which was honestly more of me just having to reread it several times to try to understand, was verse 18. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. And I'm assuming that's going to be a foreshadowing of Judas, but that took me a minute to...
Yeah.
We're eating bread now? I thought we were just washing each other's feet. Kind of...
Yeah. Well, great point. There's two big points there. I think, first off, I agree. The thing that stuck out to me at first the most was him washing the feet, obviously, but him getting up and wrapping the towel around his waist. He takes his shirt off. It's sort of like like Chris getting up on Sunday morning, and instead of having a sports coat and maybe a tie on, he takes that off and puts on like a overalls or a mechanic's jumpsuit. It would be really off-putting because Jesus has just put on like servant's attire, and he's wearing blue overalls with grease all over them. And this is Jesus. He's probably a couple years older than his disciples and is definitely their teacher. They call him rabbi, which means great one. And it's, they're friends, but they're the same way in that we're friends with our teachers sometimes. And so seeing that sort of person put on the servant's clothes is really off-putting. And then the other thing for me, that same point as you actually, but a totally different thing, is that Jesus is serving Judas. He's washing Judas's feet, and he's Jesus. And it says, essentially in verse 3, that Jesus knows that he's going to go back to God. We can also assume Jesus knows that Judas will betray him. In the last passage before this, there's actually a bit that we cut out, or maybe it's next week and I'm getting it. No, it's last week. It's in the passage before this, or right after this. I'm so sorry. In verses 21 to 30, the part we didn't read, there's the whole little story about how they ask him who's going to betray him, and it turns out he knows, and he says, whoever takes this bread, and then he hands the bread to Judas. And so, like, Jesus does this foot washing, even though and he washes Judas's feet, even though he knows Judas is going to betray him, which begs this question for us: how do we maybe do things for people, even if they don't actually seem to be following God? We don't actually know, like Jesus, right? I can't have a scanner to look at someone. For instance, maybe someone that's going to get baptized. We don't know if they actually have faith or not, or if they're a baby, if they will have faith. But we go ahead and baptize them anyways. This is sort of kind of what Jesus is doing here. So that stuck out to me. Let's see. Question 2. What do you think about Peter's response?
It made me laugh.
Yeah.
He's like, he says, "Oh, don't wash my feet. Oh, goodness." And then...
why do you think he says that?
Because why would Jesus stoop, not to our level, but dare I say, like, below our level, almost. It's just kind of shell shock. What? And Peter gets that and says, "You shall never wash my feet." And then Jesus says, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." And Peter's like, "Bathe me." Like, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. It's just so funny. He goes from, no, don't touch me, to like, "Oh, please, get the washcloth on my head, too."
Yeah, I need to be dunked.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What do you think? Should we feel like Peter at the beginning or Peter at the end, or not either of the Peters? What do we do?
Well, I don't know. It's the wanting to see Jesus as king, how Peter does, and to say, like, well, you shouldn't stoop to my level like this. But also seeing Jesus as a father that's loving and saying, like, "Please, I need you, help me wash everything."
Yeah.
So, both, I guess? I think we want both? I don't know. That's my opinion.
My thought is it's really hard for us as Christians to really emphasize both that Jesus is above us and he's Lord and he's fully God and fully man, and yet also accept him as in a relationship. And it's this really hard balance that we're trying to hit, that maybe we don't always do a great job of expressing, that if we sometimes do a really, really good job of picturing Jesus as Lord, but we push him in this area where we don't think we can actually have a relationship with him. And then sometimes we'll talk about Jesus in such human terms that we forget that he's fully God. And we forget that we should perhaps quake when we see him. We should maybe be a little afraid of him washing our feet. And
right,
know
he
in my
made
heart.
us. He made my dirty feet.
So, but sometimes we see him as so human that we forget that. And, it's kind of interesting throughout church history. One of the things you can really look at is, and put your finger on, is like, say, like in the early church, they were really, really afraid that they portrayed Jesus as too human. And now we tend to, in our era, be afraid of portraying Jesus as too much of a God. And we don't want to go to either extreme. We want to keep him as fully God and fully man. So anyways, just one thing there. Third question. What do you think the washing could symbolize? There's a whole lot of stuff on this, and people really have strong opinions. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, because instead of like saying this is it, what do you think, if anything?
I took it as a literal cleansing, a washing of sin.
Literal or washing of sin?
Oh.
No, you're good. You're good. Like, is he saying, like, a literal version would be, Jesus is saying, do this, where does it say? Verse 15. This is the reason why it's Maundy, Commandment Thursday. I've given you an example in verse 15, so that you should do just as I have done to you. That's his command in this passage. That's why we call it Maundy Thursday, because he gave us this command. And a literal interpretation would be like, literally, on the Thursday before Easter, get together and wash each other's feet. Some churches do that. We don't. But that would be a literal thing. Another one would be like, well, he's saying forgive each other's sins like this.
Well, we can't forgive each other's.
We
can,
so
but we're not God.
Maybe it's symbolizing something that he's doing, not us.
Maybe it's serve each other.
Serve each other. Another really popular thought is that he's doing this in place of baptism. Like, this is sort of like kind of like baptism, and that he's washing them of sins symbolically, even though he's going to actually literally wash their sins away, like actually cleanse them from their sins on the cross on Friday. So maybe that's one thought. Another one is that in the Gospel of John, John doesn't record the Last Supper. This is the Last Supper. This is where they're gathered together for dinner. That's where there's bread involved. And it's going to go on for several chapters, actually. John spends a whole lot of time in the next couple of chapters telling us about what they said at the supper, and that's sort of going to let us know what the cross means. But John doesn't record like communion, essentially, in his gospel. He doesn't tell us the words or anything like that. And so some folks would say, like, well, this is kind of like, instead of communion, John's actually kind of got this in there, and it's working in a very similar way that communion does. What do you think? Those are just some thoughts that are out there. Anything stick with you, or be like,
I think I would go with, I don't think that it means that we should wash each other's feet the Thursday before Easter. I don't take it literally in that sense. But I would think of it as a general command to serve and love one another in the lowly ways. Not just in the easy ways, but in the put on the dirty overalls, like you were saying. Type of way. The inconvenient way.
For sure. I think, that's a really good point. And I would totally agree with you on that. I think we 100% should do that. And I think that's the main gist of the passage. I'm also probably a little bit thinking that it has something to do with maybe how we understand baptism a little bit. And like Judas, he baptizes all of them. He washes all of them, not knowing. He knows. We don't know. So I'm tending to think that way a little bit. And Peter's like, dunk me. And he's like, it's not about the amount of water. But not everyone agrees with that. But I think the main thing we can all get out of this is the importance of the washing. So that leads us for serving one another. So that leads us to our last question. If it's mainly about serving one another, as it is, probably, then how can we wash one another's feet? How can we serve each other like Jesus served the disciples? What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of touched on that a little bit, but serving each other in the inconvenient ways. And I was trying to think of what that can look like to us, and I was thinking back to my middle school days, and I remember that I would have a big pile of laundry in my bedroom, and so did my brothers, and I never wanted to do my laundry, and I definitely did not want to fold my brother's laundry. So a way that I could have served in a lowly, it sounds bad, but would be to like just humble myself and fold their laundry and love them in a way that would be not my natural inclination of loving my brothers. Maybe that's not, maybe you didn't want a really literal example.
No, but, that's great.
That's kind of what I had.
Yeah.
Or doing a sibling's chore, something like that of, it's really easy just to compliment and use your words, but to use your actions is different.
Yeah. For me, I was thinking of, I almost wrote this down as one of the questions. Jesus is sort of serving those who are kind of under him in authority. So who are people in our lives who were sort of, maybe not under us, but like definitely kind of like look up to us? Who are people that look up to you, and how can you serve them as if you were like looking up to them? And that really like changes the way we approach something, a lot of times we have maybe friends that kind of like us more than we like them. And instead of looking at them like, why are you following me around? Instead we can sort of serve them in a way and follow them around and really love on them in that way. Another thought would be like siblings, just that one really got to me and sort of thinking of who are people that I can specifically, especially right now as we're stuck alone at home and have a ton of time for phone calls and stuff, who are people that I can be calling and just saying, hey, how are you doing? And just chatting with folks or messaging or texting, however, we do that to really care for them in that way. And then one other thing was from the disciples' point of view, Jesus gets in between their toenails. He gets in their dirtiest areas. And I don't think we need to miss that. And for me, it's a sign that like, Jesus knows my heart and he knows the junk between my toes, as gross as that is. And there's nothing that I should hide from him or can hide from him. And that's really freeing because it means that like whatever my darkest sins are, whatever like the worst places of my heart are, he knows what those are, and he's also willing to clean them and to say like, look, I love you and I'm here to take care of you. And so not like we can, whenever we're trying to compare ourselves to Jesus, we can try, but ultimately we need to look back and say like, yeah, Jesus knows us and cares for us and cleans us in a way that we can't really ever clean each other. And that's really the gift of the gospel. So hope you all have a great Easter Sunday. And we'll see you next week on Wednesday on YouTube for as we continue in our series on Samuel, the quest for the king. So subscribe, make sure you stay up to date and with all the stuff we're doing. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Easter. We'll definitely be praying for you.
And I want to say too that we really miss seeing y'all in person. This makes me so excited to get back in that classroom and see y'all on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights.
Oh, one other thing. We are going to try and put together a Zoom call this week or next for the middle school group. So if you are a middle schooler, please comment on the video if you can, or text me or Gracie or Katie, and let us know that you would be interested in that, because we would love to chat and see your faces and just hang out together as a group on Zoom.
Yes.
All right. Have a great week.
Bye, y'all. Happy Easter.